All right, guys, welcome back. Hope everybody's doing well. First time being live here in a while. Nice little rainy day here to enter the month of March. And March means we're about ready to get into that early spring. After all this snow and all this, crazy weather, we have not had a mild winter at all in the mid-Atlantic region. But we finally got through it. We got to March. Looks like the snow is behind us. We got some rain, and then hopefully it's going to warm up. We're going to get back up here in the 60s. Coming up here in the next week or two, 7 to 10 days, we should start to see the water coming back up. Hopefully we'll start to see the clarity come up. And that's one of the things we're going to talk about today in this video, because I've had a lot of people reach out to me about the baits that I've been showing on TikTok and on YouTube in the shorts that are in the Crawdad series. So we're going to just talk about crawdads, mudbugs, crayfish, whatever your poison is, because this is the time of year that we're going to start to see it begin to kick up. But first, before we do that, big shout out. Let's look at the American Chase Division monthly on Tourney X. That is a nationwide monthly kayak bass fishing river only, okay, for smallmouth on Tourney X. And the American Chase Division's nationwide, and basically chops the year up into like 3-month segments. We just finished our winter chase. And on the 28th of February, and that was pretty awesome. A lot of big fish got caught during the winter chase. Again, winter was crazy for most of the Northeast and the South this year. The South actually got more snow than it's probably gotten dropped on it this last winter, the current winter we're in like 25 years. It's been absolutely crazy. So a lot of the rivers have been washed out. They're still in recovery. It's just been pretty crazy, because you got to remember, from September, from Hurricane Helene into a high water event in November, and then all of this snow and ice and rain and everything that has just kind of come in the last 3 months during the winter months is all directly impacted our river systems. So it's it's like they're completely different rivers than they were in March of last year. I mean, honestly, and a lot of them in shape and form are very different rivers, especially as you get further inland and southwest into parts of Tennessee, West Georgia, North Carolina, places like that. The rivers, because of Hurricane Helene, just changed dramatically in form and function. Okay. And so it's going to be really, really interesting in a lot of those parts that, they'll see like the differences in those areas. But almost every river system has been negatively impacted this winter. I mean, it's just been that bad. So we don't really know for sure, like, okay, it's not going to be a normal early spring kind of deal, because the water temperatures are going to be colder longer. Okay. Normally we begin to see it by mid-March, a temperature change. We may not see that really. Our river systems may stay below 40 degrees, 42 degrees, 44 degrees until early April. I mean, it is not uncommon to happen when you have a winter like we just had, and have all of that, the thermals be that way. I mean, I know for me, on the upper Potomac, we had snow that stayed on the ground for 11 days without melting. Like, it's because the ground temperatures were that cold. And so the water temperatures out on the river have been cold and cold and cold. So, just keep that in mind when we talk about spring, like, because everybody's spring is different. Like, spring is sprung. Well, that's a different, depending on what part of the region you're in, and a different what part, whatever state you live in, especially if you're competing in the nationwide series. You can find that series, American Chase Division, on Tourney X. Smallie Chaser River Bassin is the club tab on Tourney X. Anyone, you don't have to be a member. Anybody can fish that series. Smallmouth only, river only, anywhere in the country. Todd Cox was the winner of the winner's chase. I think Todd caught, he won both parameters. He won the best 10 with I think 200.25, I think was his total, 200.25 inches. And then he won best 5 with 102, I think 0.5 or 0.75. So he caught over 100 inches. Think about that. That's 5 citation smallmouth in the winter we just had. Okay? That's crazy. All right? But that's when a lot of times the bigs come out. They just do in the wintertime. Typically, unfortunately, we did not have a very good February. Most of the guys that I know that I stay in contact with around the region, compared to last year, there were dozens of citation smallmouth caught last year. In this year, one. Okay? And it's because the rivers to my south of the Potomac River, have just all been basically washed out and blown out. You had the James River at 25, 26 feet west of Lynchburg. You had the Staunton River at Staunton Roanoke at 22 feet. You had the James River in Richmond, Virginia at 18 feet. Okay, and all of those feeder rivers and tributaries contributing to the James River, the New River, the Upper Potomac River, they were all 3 and 4 times above normal pool for a considerable amount of time. So that plays an impact on, your pattern recognition of what's going to happen in the fishery, right? When is the spring pattern? When are we going to move off? When are we going to get into the pre-spawn for the largemouth guys, right, in those river systems? We're not really concerned too much with pre-spawn for smallies yet because we're months ahead of that, right? But we know that as the water temperature rises, as the water clarity gets better, this is when we're going to see that trigger and move. And it begins with a movement. It begins with that movement for smallmouth away from their winter haunts, which are deeper pools. Okay. Now, there was a lot of deeper pools this year because we had water 12, 14 feet. Okay. Right now, it's like 4 feet. Okay, it's coming back down to its regular, normal levels. But when you were January and February, and these river systems were at 12 to 26 feet, scattered about. Okay, and then as they're still below 40 in most places, 42 or below in most places, they're moving back to their deeper pools. Okay, because they're not ready to make their pattern shifts, obviously, for spring. And so, that's an important component, to understand, when that move is going to happen. And that's when you find those big days in the spring for catch rates, is when you caught them when they're moving. They're moving from one pattern to another pattern, and then they're going to set in that pattern, obviously, once the water temperatures begin to rise, and then we also see. But the beginning thing to consider is, when is the forage of your river system going to be triggered by the change in water temperature? Okay? Anyone who's ever been a kid, who's ever played in the river, knows when the first signs of crayfish, crawfish, mudbugs show up. Okay? And it's just as that water temperature begins to rise, is when the thermals in the earth, from the earth's core, the thermals warm up the ground of which your crayfish, crawdads, or mudbugs are in right now. They do not hibernate, Do not hibernate. I know that's kind of like a myth that's out there that crayfish hibernate. They don't. You can still find crayfish in January and December. As a matter of fact, when I went out to the Upper Potomac about 3 weeks ago, after one of the snowstorms, dumped about 6 inches of snow, and then the snow began to melt. I went out to the locks up on the Upper Potomac on the C&O towpath, and sure enough, there were crayfish moving around because they got disturbed, in the mud because of all the current coming down from upriver, downriver, because the river rose from 2.5 feet to 8.5 feet. And it pushed a lot of stuff down, debris. You probably saw it crossing the bridges all through the mid-Atlantic over the last 6 to 8 weeks. You've seen tons of debris in the river. So, that debris is probably going to be there until early summer. But it moves, not just the timber weighs so much that it pushes everything, rock, and then the rock moves the earth, and then the mud, and then the grass can rip grass. A flooding can take grass down, right? All of that stuff happens. And so I saw, probably about 24 little small ones, like moving around in the cold water. I mean, 38-degree, 37-degree water. Okay. So any of these things can trigger that, but in reality, they want the thermals of the ground temperature, okay, to warm up the ground first, okay, that triggers them to make their move, okay, out of the ground and into the water, okay? And they predominantly don't want that water to be under 45 degrees, okay? And they predominantly would like that water, they love for the water to be clear, okay, and have some clarity to it, okay? You hit the trifecta if you get on that bite, okay? Because if you get that trifecta of the water's warming up, it's clear, and the thermals underneath have warmed up, and then your crawdads are making their move up, burrowing up and out, and then your smallies are feeding. That's a trifecta, okay? That is what happens when it happens. And if you're out there when it's happening, it is one of the best freaking bites in the springtime there is, okay? Because they're ready to do their feeding, all right? They're ready to just feed up, all right? And so you've got a lot of stuff out there. So let's talk a little bit about, we talked about crayfish, in terms of they're omnivores, right? So the crayfish, and all our river systems are omnivores, okay? And so they're feeding themselves on what we think of in terms of when we think of spring. When we think of winter, we're thinking everything's dark and brown and no flowers, no greenery, no grass, all that stuff. Once all that stuff starts coming in, then you've got organic plant matter, you've got plant material, you've got microorganisms, invertebrates, small fish, all that stuff coming around, the algae, aquatic plants, all this stuff starts waking up, okay? And then that's when you're going to see your crayfish wake up, okay? It's not, again, they're not dormant, okay? They are dormant. They're not hibernating, okay? They're out and about in the wintertime too, just not nearly as much. Last year we had a mild winter. So the cray stayed with us until mid-January. That's how mild the winter was, okay? So you could still be throwing your jig. You could still be throwing your crawfish, crayfish, crawdad imitator all freaking late fall, early winter because the fish were still seeing that in their river system, and they were still feeding up on it. It becomes a little bit harder to use that presentation in late January and February, okay, when the conditions are what they are, okay? It just is. When the water's really, really cold, any smallmouth that's out there roaming is not used to seeing a crayfish or a crawdad, right, on the bottom or in the river. They're just not. And so it's not as enticing, for them, because it's just not something that's, quote unquote normal, right, for them to see that. So water depth, okay, shallow water versus deep water, okay? Smallmouth are moving from the deeper water to the shallow water in springtime. Shallow water is predominantly, you probably see it during low water times. You'll see basically the little indentions all over everywhere. If you're in like the Susquehanna or the Upper Potomac, the James River, the New to a lesser extent, because the water, the banks aren't as high up for the New. It's more like rock and like, you know what I mean? But on a lot of river systems, you'll see all the hole, and that's basically where they've come out from. And so you're going to find that first in your shallow, and they're going to go to rocks and logs and thicker grass, because obviously they know they are also prey, right? And so that's just a real thing. Obviously the clear water is a little bit, that's a dangerous time, the clear water, okay, for them, because of, they don't have any camouflage, right, in clear water. In muddied up water and stuff like that, they're brown, opaque, green. They can kind of blend in, all right? But when it's clear water, it's game on, okay, for those smallmouth. So not only it works to their advantage because they can locate food for themselves, but it also works to their disadvantage because they can get targeted, okay, by tons of species, okay? Turbid water or murky water, They rely more on, chemical cues that are in the water, for them, because they have limited visibility. Okay. It's the same with smallmouth in terms of how they can key on forage when the river has been what the river's been for the last few weeks, where it's been more like stained chocolate milk, muddy, all that stuff. They rely on a different set of senses in order to track down, a meal. The smallmouth are voracious. Okay. So like when that bite gets on, it gets on. All right. And so it's a pretty interesting dynamic between smallmouth and crayfish. I believe it is more of, like I said, a voracious relationship than, say, largemouth bass, okay, and crayfish. Because almost all of our inland fisheries have crayfish, okay, a bunch of species. Maryland has about 13 different kinds of crayfish. Virginia has probably about 20. And so maybe more than that now. Pennsylvania's got its rusty craw invasion. It's an invasive species coming from the west. It's been dealing with that. It's maybe the range may be coming down into Maryland now, which is going to conflict with the Allegheny, which is the crawl that I'm used to seeing in my river systems. And you've got a virile crawl. You've got a whole bunch of different crawls we're going to talk about here. Okay. And so you've got to understand that there's quite a few myths out there, like the rock dwellers, right? That the crawfish are only rock dwellers. That's a myth, okay? That crawfish are all red, okay? You guys have heard the myths, right? Of spring, that okay, this is a Rayburn red style, right? Okay, very, very popular in the spring at the big box store. Okay, extremely popular. People are going to go pick up. Almost everybody you probably know who fishes with crankbaits has a all red crankbait. Okay, however, 95% of crawfish species are never this color. Okay, now why is it called Rayburn red? Right? Why do we call it that in the fishing? We call it that because of the species from Louisiana, okay, in Texas, that they have down there in Louisiana lakes in the backwater. Trying to think that place, just lost my mind. But you've got, on the lakes that border Louisiana and Texas, or just in eastern Texas, Caddo is what I was thinking of. Places like that, and a swampy kind of thing down in that part of the country. It's not uncommon for you to see all red crayfish. Okay, that's the predominant species. Okay, but in the mid-Atlantic and in the Northeast, it's not. Okay, so when you're throwing a bait like this in the Northeast or in the Mid-Atlantic, what you're really doing is it's less about natural and it's less about color. Though we do know, okay, for those of you who don't know, bass only see things in two colors. Okay, they see things in colors and shades of red and green. Okay, that's it. Comes through their cones and their eyes. Okay, through their scent. That's it. Red and green. So just keep that in mind. So though they're seeing this in the water column, it's very unnatural. Okay, because crawfish, for the most part, in most inland river systems, from Ohio to Ohio River System watershed, Susquehanna watershed, Potomac River watershed, Shenandoah River watershed, New River. New River does have a little bit more red to them. Okay, and the New River crawl, which is a species, they have a lot more red in them. Okay, it's more the action. Okay, it's more the noise, the thump, and the action in the water and the movement that really is attracting that spring bite. How do we know this? Jay, what are you talking about? That's blasphemy. I've heard my whole life that you should be fishing with a red crankbait in the spring, a red lipless crankbait, okay? Or just a regular square bill crankbait. True. But if you test it, you can also catch all the same fish on any other color crankbait or any other color lipless. Because again, it's not about the color, it's about the action and the noise. They're already looking to feed up. They've been in their winter haunts forever. Okay, they haven't really. Their metabolism, they use their stored energy from the late fall. Okay, they're starting now to realize they've got depleted energy, and so they need to move out, roam, and start to feed. Okay, so they're looking for what? Targets of opportunity based on all of their senses, not just visual. Okay, so while you can go out there and catch with this crankbait anywhere in the country, probably at a right time of year, based on the action, the noise, the thump, and that. But it's really not based on the color. So the notion that you've got to throw a red anything in March and April or early May, it's a misnomer. I mean, you can get bit on anything, any color. Okay, pink lemonade, right? Morning dawn, like there are colors that you just get bit. Like it's just. Okay, so it's more marketing that you'll find that all the major manufacturers have this color and it's just so dominant. You know, like I've said before, if you go to any big box store, you know, big brands, big manufacturers, big five, you pretty much got crawl, perch, shad, okay, and then fire tiger, right? That's pretty much your standardized basket of colors that they ship across the entire country. Because they're big box stores and they want you to be able to walk into that store. Doesn't matter whether you walk into Dick's in Richmond, Virginia, or Dick's in Michigan, or Ohio, or Pennsylvania, or wherever they want the shopping experience to be the same. Okay. So on the aisle, you've got crawdad red, perch, shad, and fire tiger everywhere, right? Doesn't matter what the natural species are in that particular region, unless you've got some savvy people running those stores. We do in our region have some of the big box stores that bring in some local custom stuff that's really dialed into the river systems, but most don't. Most big box stores don't. And so we've been programmed to think that. Y'all remember this one? Y'all remember this right there? How old do you think this bait is? This bait is about a half as old as I am. This bait's probably 20 plus years old, 25 years old. Okay. And it's a color we all got sold on back in the 1980s, 1990s, right? You know, and it's sold everywhere. Everywhere Rapala is sold, it's sold, right? Any store, right? All different variations, right? And so we've just been kind of like putting this thing that like in none of these, at least in our region and all the way up to the Northeast, none of these species of crawfish, crawdads, mudbugs come out of the ground looking like this. None of them, okay, in our region, okay? Again, Louisiana, for sure, different species entirely, okay? But they don't. So when you think about that, what's the life cycle, right? You know, you've got a bunch of different native species, you know, all across the mid-Atlantic and Northeast region, because that's pretty much what I know, what I fish the most, and what I'm more concentrated on in terms of being a chaser, okay, and chasing smallies, all these river systems. You know, you guys that are out west, that's out of my depth, okay? And a lot of times the problem that so many of us have come across with YouTube and the rise of social media is the fact that, you know, I try always to like let you guys know where my head's at, where I'm coming from, and what water my bait is landing in, okay, and where I'm fishing. Because a lot of times, guys, pros, guides, whoever it is, will be on YouTube or Instagram, and they're like, you know, they're talking about baits, but they could be on Clear Lake in California. I mean, you know, a lot of times the JDM baits running into this problem because a lot of the big time Japanese domestic market guys are on the West Coast, okay? So they're fishing in Arizona, they're Havasu, California, Clear Lake. They're fishing out west. Well, out west, techniques don't always work back east. They don't. And so it's tough when you're on YouTube and people aren't qualifying. Look, this is how we're fishing. This is what happens in our part of the country. But in your part of the country, this technique might not work for you. Like, big time glide baits might not work for you in your fishery where you're located in a region, but a guy on YouTube is in Texas, okay? The swim bait craze, you know, down in Texas that started like 5, 6, 7 years ago. Like, those reservoirs and those lakes set up completely different than what we have. That's why you don't see very many swim bait. I mean, they obviously work, but they're not to the extent of double-digit bass like in Texas and in California. So you're not finding videos of like guys throwing big-time glide baits and stuff like that in our region because it's just not, applicable, right? So we got the northern crawfish, okay, the rusty crawfish, Blue Ridge crayfish, okay, the common crayfish, the virile crayfish, okay, red swamp, okay, that's what you're getting, all right, marbled crayfish, all right. I mean, I break all down the native species in our region. If you're interested in that, you can hit that Substack newsletter, upper left-hand or upper right-hand corner or on here on the screen. And you can look at all the crayfish, what they look like. And the thing about it that's important that I want people to understand is the crayfish don't look the same from beginning of the cycle to the end of the cycle. And you've got to understand that unless you're just throwing your crankbait in terms of action or thump or rattle, okay, that you want to mimic the natural order of things in your fishery throughout the progression of the life cycle of the spring. And what I mean by that is when the new ones, when they come out of the mud or out of the river composition, wherever they were, could be in logs, under logs, wherever it is, okay? Oftentimes, they look like this, okay, in the early spring. Look how white, cream with green or olive, okay? Green or olive. They don't look like this, guys, all right? Again, we've been sold this notion forever. They don't look like this, all right? So early on in the spring, as they come up and as they begin to eat, right? Well, what do they eat? Okay? What do they eat? That is the determining factor as they progress in their color change of their exoskeleton, okay? Of their, it's all based on that, forage species they're eating. Initially, they're not getting that because they just got up. They just woke up. They came out of kind of being dormant a little bit, and now they're out and about. Now they're feeding, and now they're gorging on all these things that ultimately begin to change its color. So they go from this real olive brown, a little bit brown, but more white, to then this color, okay? And then see that change, okay? They get a little bit more brown, and that shell becomes a little bit more brown, a little bit more black into it, okay, as we're entering into May, okay? So this is more like end of March, April, early on, then we're into May, okay? And now they're obviously getting bigger, all right? And then what happens is technically everything else is coming back out into the ecosystem. Everything's about spring is sprung. There's a lot more activity, a lot more food out there, a lot more sun penetration. The rivers, the river water clarity, everything begins to get healthy. And then you're going to begin to see that most of them change again, okay? They're going to start to change again, all right? And they're going to make this transformation. And again, depending on the species that we're talking about, determines really that spectrum, okay, of when the changes in the colors begin to happen, okay? And the food source and what they have. A real healthy, vibrant river system, okay? The change is going to happen quicker than a system that doesn't have balance, it doesn't have the right forage, limited vegetation, okay? Ultimately, you're going through summertime where you get them into these two coloration patterns. Yellowy brown, okay? Little red to them, all right? And then you get into late summer, all right? And more as we get through late summer, July, August, okay, and into September, you're going to see a big shift, okay? Your two colors are your late where it's more brown, okay? You'd see that. It's more brownish, okay? More orange, right? Like beginning to show through. Red and orange are starting to come out. And then when you get into September, it's a lot more orange, okay? A lot more red. So that real red, unless it's a rusty, okay, which you'll find a lot of red on the side, really, and then black at the top, and then a lighter shades on the bottom. Unless it's a rusty crawl, that's the rest of them are going to be more brown. Okay, brown. They get a little bit of red, then they get this orange to them, and then by the time you get to October and November, you're looking at something that looks more like that. Okay, they've completed the cycle, the year cycle. Okay, a lot more red, orange, black, a lot bigger in profile because they've made it through the whole season. Okay, and of course there are differences. Okay, like I said, the New River, down in the New River, you may find them to be a lot more like this, a lot more, okay, red and orange. Okay, and they've got that creamy bottom. The New River bottom is a creamy bottom. So whatever you're doing with soft plastics, whatever you're doing with crankbaits, whatever, that you want to mimic crayfish imitators, in that river system, you really want to have a cream colored bottom. And you could, there's tons of soft plastics out there that mimic that, okay, that have their bottoms are cream and their top is a brownish, kind of thing. So it's, in terms of that. So that's just a really, really great way of kind of like thinking about it, because some of them do keep that creamy bottom and others don't. Others will turn brownish, like the James River, especially the Middle River, for example. The White River crawl is more white throughout, hence White River, but it's because they stay a little bit more white, pop the Digger crayfish. Digger's another one. Big sandy crayfish, again, browns, heavy browns, okay? My Allegheny, heavy browns. Now, sometimes they may have some, and sometimes you may get a little bit of uncertainty in terms of which species of cray it actually is, because the ranges of these species is starting to get a little convoluted, okay? And so you can kind of keep that in mind. But if you go to the Substack, you can see pictures of these crayfish. The real crayfish, there's the blue. I haven't talked to one about this yet, but we got a couple in we got the Chesapeake Bay, right? And we got the Potomac River blue crab, right? We got a lot of different stuff. So it's, it's not, unwise to have a blue crab crawdad style crankbait for your upper bay, okay? Or your Potomac River, or anything that's on the shore, anything that's river, rivers that enter into, a bay or the ocean, right? Ultimately, because that's when you're going to get, for the most part, blue crab, and you also have bluish colored crawdads, that you're going to find, that you're definitely going to find. Let's see if I can pull that up. Boom, boom, boom. Big Sandy's one of those too that's got that brown and blue to it, on its claws and stuff. So you got, not only do we have crankbaits, we've got crayfish imitating jigs, okay, obviously a fan favorite. Soft plastic, finesse baits, for that. We've got the crankbaits that we're talking about today. You got spinner baits. All these things are out to mimic that spring burst, okay? The crawl break is what it's called. It's when the crawfish break out, and dominate our river systems, okay? And so these things are all, dependent upon those species and size. Like, for me, obviously in the early spring, like a lot of people are like, go big and go home. You hear that a lot, right? And I think there's applications for that for sure. But in the spring, most of these cray are coming out an inch and a half, and inch and 3/4. Like, it's like you don't really need to go too big, okay? Like initially, to really get bit and get a track. Sometimes too big can actually hurt you in terms of catches. So you also can go with a little bit smaller. And I mean, if you could think about the movement of one of these in the water, and then let's just pull up, one of the other, that's a big difference, right? There's a big difference between these two size crankbaits, okay? All right? And so the little ones in the spring, especially if you're around rock and you're in a shallower 2 feet of water, 3 feet of water, and you've got a lot of rock, I find the little ones work a lot better. Compare these two right here. Okay? Really great crawl patterns, okay? Custom patterns painted to look exactly like your forage species, and your size determines what time of spring that you are, you're utilizing them. So you can take that same color and then go from a 1.5 to 2.5 to a big one, okay? That's just how you can do it throughout the year as the crayfish get bigger. Especially if you're looking for bigger bites, in your river system. But that's not, but you also can go, like I said, you got some different colors. You want to draw the red, you want to grab their, to entice a strike, make sure that they see it, in clear water. It's got a little red to it. Purple, that's another, look at that crawl, but that one's more purple, right? Which is really, really effective for like your tidal areas, right? Because again, it's a lot like the blue crab. Why does black and blue work so effective? Okay, especially in tidal fisheries like the Potomac River. Black and blue works because of the forage of blue crab that the bass are typically used to seeing and feeding off of, right? And so that's why anything purple or blue becomes, a color of choice, even when you're going hard bait, okay? A lot of people only think about it in terms of soft baits, soft plastics, right? That's all, they think of black and blue as like soft plastic. They don't think about black and blue, in terms of hard baits as much, okay? And they're really leaving a lot on the table by doing that, because you're getting a different kind of action. You're getting a different kind of entice strike. Even with lipless, all the different style of lipless crankbaits that are out there now, it's crazy. JDMs are killing it. I'm sure it's going to start to come. I think there hasn't really been too much innovation in lipless crankbaits in the North America manufacturers for a while. They've been focused more on live scope and, product development and things like that. And, getting smaller and the finessey soft plastic kind of deal, the hover rigs and all that stuff. But I'm telling you, same exact thing with your lipless crankbaits, okay? Crawl patterns on your lipless. Now, a lot of times, peel around real quick. A lot of times, what you're going to find is that there's not as much variety in your friggin' lipless crankbaits at the big box stores, okay? There's just not. All right? Like I said before, it's not really been something that the major manufacturers have kind of dedicated too much. The Japanese have, okay? They got Vibe. They got tons of different. Jackal's got them. They got tons of different ones. It hasn't really happened too much with many of the men. They may have 2 or 3 kind of like staple patterns, but a lot of times what you're going to find is you'll find more chrome-oriented, gold or chrome-oriented patterns. You're going to find white, lipless. This tends to be like the normal type profile, okay? If you're on the Isle, doesn't matter where you are in the country. You've got the again, this is another really good one though. The gold for certain times of year, either the gold with the black back or silver, all silver chrome. Those tend to be the ones you see featured. Other than obviously again the red, right? The red lipless, right? Or what gets featured more times than not, for everybody, right? Because at all the big box stores around the country. And so you really want to get it dialed in, really, your same bait, but kind of like, like here, like for the upper bay, it's a little bit different scenario, but this is a repaint. Okay. This was a big box store bait. I believe this isn't made anymore. It's not manufactured anymore. I grabbed 30 or 40 of them because they are effective. I think this was Jawbone. Which used to be Jawbone used to be a brand that was owned by Dick's. It was like a house brand for like Dick's Sporting Goods. I'm not sure if it's around anymore. But it's definitely not sold in the stores. Maybe it's sold online by Dick's, but I had a really good relationship. Always encourage you to establish relationships with the people who work in the departments of your big box stores or your tackle shops or the owner of your tackle shops to let you in on things like when I got the phone call about this stuff, how they were discontinuing selling all the Jawbone stuff, the Jawbone frogs and things like that. And it was a really good situation. And then I just had them repainted. These were repainted by Willamette Weapon Lures. Okay. I sent them out to Washington State and I had them repainted. Here's two of them right here. I got a fire crawl, this is my fall crawl. Okay. For the most part, my fall crawl. All right. And you can see how different that color is. Look at that red all over that bait. Okay. And then this is my early spring version. Okay. It's got a little red on there on that, but I mean, for the most part, it's more green, right? Just like for my inland water systems, one little green in it. So Willamette Weapon Lures did a great job. These are repaints, guys, and this is what you can do for any of your favorite crankbaits. I mean, I'm not knocking big box. I'm not knocking major manufacturers. There are baits out there that we've grown up with using and we're loyal to. Doesn't matter what the brand is. If you like the action or you like the rattle and the thump and the action of a particular hard bait, you can have it repainted. I can't stress that enough. And you should have it repainted. Okay? If for no other reason than the adage I stress, which is fish a little different than everybody else. If everybody else is throwing that same Rapala pattern crankbait, okay, that same Rayburn red crankbait in spring out there on the river, okay, or out there in the lake and the reservoir. It amazes me that people still throw those in lakes and reservoirs that don't have crayfish, okay? They still catch fish, though, all right, because it's about the action and it's about enticing the strike, is have them repainted. Have them painted. Send the picture to the, okay, send the picture. You want a bait custom painted, right? Grab a picture, or just simply tell the custom bait maker. You can tell me flat out, okay, what river are you fishing in? I can do the research, right? This is the river you're fishing in. These are the 3 primary cross species. Here are a couple examples. Here's a couple proofs. Here's a couple whatever colorations patterns. Are these good to go? Are you cool with this? Boom, boom. Get them painted. Boom, they're done. It's it. You know, and I make this argument a lot of times to folks is a lot of people don't understand the game's changed. The landscape has changed, okay? I'll probably do a couple of videos on this. I don't know if you guys are paying attention, but, I mean, I have the utmost respect. I really do from a business standpoint. And just it's a case study, man. Like, it's a case study in Guggen. I got the utmost respect for Guggen, okay, as a case study of how they developed their brand and how they brought people in and they brought people on YouTube and they created community around, you know, wanting their own baits, you know, being shut out by the major brands, the individual anglers, and not being able to get deals with the major manufacturers. So American ingenuity, they took it upon themselves to create their own company so they could fish. And they produced baits that they could fish and then began to share those baits. It's a great, great story. You know, that I think, you know, is lost on a lot of people now. You know, because the industry doesn't like that. Okay. The industry wants stability in brands, and brands carve out a niche on their turf, and brands procure space on shelves in retail. That's how it works. But the custom bait makers the evolution of the custom bait maker in the last decade has been earth moving. I'm dead serious. The number of people, and they're going about it in a different way. And they're selling more baits now than the big box stores are. Okay. If you put all the custom bait makers together in one basket. Okay. Not individual, but like if you put them all together. All right. Because they just offer more, before most people would argue to me, they'd be like, Jay, man, I'm not going to pay $12 for a crankbait. I'm not going to pay $10 for a crankbait. Because at that time in the store, all the crankbaits were $3.99, $4.99, $5.99, right? Made perfect sense. Like it was like custom's too expensive. Well, now it's not as expensive if you think about it. Okay. I mean, all the JDM baits on retail stores in America, none of them are less than like $12.99. Even soft plastics are $12.99. Okay. Almost all the hard baits coming from, even an Evoke, even whatever. I mean, you're looking at 18 to 25 bucks. Okay. What we used to think Megabass was over expensive at 25 bucks for a jerk bait, right? Well, the industry has changed so much that the lower end, the lower end price, not in quality, just price of the brands in America are now $2 and $3, $4 more. Okay. I mean, even Guggen was selling some of its hard baits at what, $14, $16, some of the stuff out there. Okay. That's just so custom has now come back, and major manufacturers have come closer to custom. So it's really not that much more expensive to actually have somebody actually paint you the bait, okay, from a blank that they have, or if you want to buy the $5.99, Berkeley, you know what I'm saying? Or $8.99 Berkeley, and then have it painted, right? Okay, and then work that out, because I guarantee you that these baits, and been my experience, that even when I'm out on the water with guys that are throwing crankbaits, when I'm throwing crankbaits, but I'm throwing a custom crankbait and they're throwing a store-bought crankbait, I get bit more, okay? Doesn't mean they're not catching fish, okay? Because they're still catching fish. They just didn't catch as many. But we're both throwing crankbaits, square bill crankbaits, right? So again, you want to make sure that you're trying to, we always say they match the hatch, right? It's always been, since we've been kids growing up, that's been beat over our heads. You got to match the hatch. Well, guys, Rayburn Red doesn't match the hatch in the Potomac River or the Shenandoah River or the James River or the Susquehanna River. It doesn't, okay? It doesn't match the hatch, okay? If you want to match the hatch, you want to go with, for Crawdad or your forage species, okay? A Tennessee shad, okay? A shiner kind of crankbait. Those are your natural match the hatch colorations, okay? Not Rayburn Red, okay? Again, doesn't mean that you can't get bit with a Rayburn Red style crankbait, okay? In your pond, your river, or whatever. I'm just saying you're going to get bit more, okay, if you dial in all of your baits to the natural, abundant forage species that your target species is used to feeding with, okay? It's just really, really, really important to concept. To the dialing things in, their innovation has changed the color pattern of the spectrum of what we see now in baits. And again, a lot of the fish out there probably in your fishery have never seen this color, okay? Have never seen any of this, right? They had you're right, from us in terms of anglers, but it's really closer to what the forage patterns are, in river systems, at least in the mid-Atlantic and up, going up towards Pennsylvania and New York, and as far west of me as Ohio. It really is about the actual crawdads that are located in those fisheries and what their behaviors are. Again, we focus on water temperature for spawn, right? A lot of largemouth guys look to water temperature. I tend to look to lunar stuff a lot of times in the spring. That's just because of how I was raised and taught and instructed, about looking at reading river systems. Not everybody believes in that. Most people believe they've been sold that it's the water temperature that is what triggers the spawn. So to pay attention to that range of that water temperature from the pre-spawn transition to the spawn, right? And that is true for bass, but it's equally true for your forage species like crawdads. So when you see that change, know that change in water temperature and water clarity that causes your fish to get active is also because what it's done is it's caused all of the forage species in the spring to get active. Okay. So when you hit that trifecta, like I said earlier, of water temperature, okay, water clarity, right, and then your bass are beginning to transition, okay, away from deep water summer pattern to spring pattern. And that spring pattern initially in that transition is a feed up pattern. They got to replenish all of the energy that they wasted and that kept them alive during the wintertime. Because remember, they weren't out swimming around in the wintertime. They were hunkered down. And so they kept that energy that they had consumed in the late fall. Well, now they need to replenish the stores, okay? So they need to get out and about and hunt, okay? And so when you time that with the water temperature and the water clarity, that is when you are going to get on your biggest bites before spawn. Like I know a lot of people that'll bedfish and stuff like that for largemouth, and that's fine. That's not my jam. I'm not into that. Just not how I was raised. Sorry. And I don't do that. I don't sight fish on beds. I know people do. I accept the fact that people do. And then you've got the post-spawn transition after that, right? After they've gone through that whole spawning process. So these are just some of the crawbaits patterns. Again, like I said, the life cycle. Okay. Early spring when they first break out of the river composition. Then the next stage is brown. Okay. Brown, a little creamy brown. All right. Then the next stage, they start to get a little yellower, maybe a little light orangish kind of color, kind of weird coloration. Okay, then they get a little bit more as we get into summertime. All right. And we get into late summer. Late summer, a lot more darker color on the shell, okay? A lot more stuff like that. Again, predicated on eating a lot more different things coming into the ecosystem, okay? Which also contributes to the coloration of their shells and everything, how it pronounced, iodine, things like that. All the different stuff that's in the fishery that they're consuming, okay? So late summer, and then we get into our last part of the year, fall, into late fall, okay? Not uncommon for them to have that. Other than your rusty is going to have some red on it by late spring, okay? Just a natural thing that they have. They all seem to have it, okay? That gets pronounced in that. And then those are your cycles. The natural colors of brown, for olive drab, brown kind of crawl patterns, okay? Safe bet. If you're unsure of your species, if you're unsure really, I can almost guarantee you that you're going to have a crawfish, crawdad, or mudbug in your river system in the mid-Atlantic or the Northeast that is this color, okay? In one variation or the other, all right? They're not going to be this color, okay? They're just not, all right? So that's it. Crawdads. Again, America's Chase going on right now on Tourney X, Smallie Chaser River Bassin. Just finished our winner's chase. Congratulations, Todd Cox. over 200 inches in the best 10 and over 102 inches in the best 5. You can check out those catches. All that's 5 citation smallmouth. You can catch all 5 of those on Turning X by looking at the images. Join the Smallmouth Chaser, the Smallmouth Army newsletter on Substack. It's growing every week. A lot more stuff coming down. If you're interested in joining the community, I'll also put an invite. If you comment, or I can put an invite into our private Discord, community Discord, where the magic happens, with all the guys providing that information, talking about everything. It's just a lot easier, a lot better, a lot more less drama than Facebook. Okay. And so we're going to keep doing these. The next one I'm going to do is going to be on the lipless crankbaits, because obviously lipless crankbaits is one of your number one techniques in the spring. Doesn't matter where you're fishing, reservoir, lake, river system, especially if you're chasing greenfish. It is just an incredible technique to be using. So we're going to get back to some of these traditional techniques that a lot of us have forgotten. A lot of people have put to bed because of live scope. They put to bed because we've been inundated and hit with all the latest new and improved tricks of the trade. You know what I mean? When in reality, all of these old baits that we grew up on catch fish even better than some of these presentations. But we'll also keep an eye on Japan and what's coming out with JDM, because they are very innovative. They are very innovative in what they are doing, especially in patterns, coloration patterns, but also in actions in certain categories. Now, they've revolutionized the chatter category and now the spinnerbait category in terms of some different crazy stuff in a lot of those brands. And we're going to get into it, and we're going to break a lot of those down, offer a lot of the baits coming in from Japan. Going to be able to provide a mechanism for people to procure those and get those, through us, and and answer any questions. One last thing here. Let me put this up on the screen for those of you who are unfamiliar. If you're into tournament fishing, let's see if that's going to pop up. If you're into kayak bass tournament fishing, you want to check out Kayak Adventure Series. They've got events all over the country. Our series is predominantly located in the Mid-Atlantic region. And Kayak Adventure Series is located kind of all across the country. So you guys can check that out. It'll be really, really cool. Hope everybody is doing well. Please like and subscribe to the channel. If you are interested in this, Smalley Chaser channel, my own personal channel, J.O. Scott Fishing, if you're unfamiliar with that, as well as the Smalley Chaser channel on YouTube. So hope everybody has a great day. Hope everybody stays out of the rain. The rain's coming down now. Middle of the afternoon, we're getting like some showers and rain moving into the Mid-Atlantic area. So it's going to be interesting next 24 to 48 hours. All right, guys.